Well, good morning, everybody. Our first map today looks back at the 2025 year so far at the preliminary report summary for severe weather reports. And so we're trying to look here at where we've had tornado, severe wind, and hail. If you look down here on the bottom, you can see the panel that tells you just how many. And with this past weekend's tornado reports, of which we had 4, we're now at 1,504 tornadoes, which is above the historical average. But there was something unique about this map and the National Weather Service's issuance of severe thunderstorm watches that I found kind of interesting. And what prompted me to think about this was Andrew and I and Matt were kind of texting back and forth all weekend about the pattern. And Andrew reminded me of a tweet that he sent out. This was last month, but he put out a map that was put together by the Storm Prediction Center that looked at, again, this was about a month ago, where there had been severe thunderstorm watches issued by the National Weather Service this year. And there was something quite interesting about this particular setup. And what was interesting was this hole that was kind of right in through this area, specifically right in through here. Now, of course, that's where we live, right? So we're thinking about this, but I think it's just an important thing to illustrate on this map as to a spot where the atmosphere just kind of gave up in its ability to produce any sort of significant weather. And I joke about it because what sparked the conversation was on Saturday, I sent Andrew and Matt a text in the morning because I heard thunder. I mean, we live right here. It was the first time we'd heard thunder locally in quite some time. Now, there's a whole lot of other stuff to unpack on this map, which again kind of overlays areas where there were severe thunderstorm watches. But I want to point out one big thing. Before the rain this past weekend, that corridor right in through here, and then again in parts of Ohio and Indiana, then getting into the Northeast, these areas were extremely dry. And there's been no doubt about that. That's been a major topic of conversation, while there's been much better rainfall that's been here in the western and high plains and northern plains. We're watching a developing drought situation in Texas along the Gulf Coast. The precipitation stats in the southeast have been, they've been a bit skewed by nearby tropical brushes that have brought in some rain, but there are some folks in the southeast that are extremely dry up to the mid-Atlantic and again into the northeast. We continue to watch this pocket of the northwest, even though the upcoming rainfall forecast is very good. Meanwhile, out west, we've had multiple tropical systems, the remnants of which come through. There's been cutoff lows that have just lived off the California coast. There's another one coming there, and that's why you can kind of piece together the statistics the way they are. Just kind of a quick summary about this. But I want to show you what's been happening since August. So since August, we watched this. Watch where I'm tracing this line. I'm running over the top of the main ridges in the upper atmosphere. So there's been a high pressure cell that sat here, kind of near the Korean Peninsula, one south of the Aleutian Islands. These are upper level pressure systems, and then one over Canada. And what these 3 areas of high pressure did was they took the jet stream and shoved it very, very far to the north. And that robbed the momentum out of the flow. And that's what gave us, this issue with having the wind pattern do something like this. So the Bermuda High drifted, and it set up its circulation way far off to the east. I reported last week all of the tropical systems and where they had been going as a result of this. And if there was a pull on moisture from the Gulf, it kind of stayed within the plains and made it pretty far to the west, which is interesting. With nothing to turn it in this direction, that moisture just advected with the heat straight north toward the high pressure cell in the upper atmosphere. Okay, so that's where the ridge is. So it kind of gets pulled along underneath. And that's what we saw. And so there was a narrow band of heavier precipitation. Meanwhile, the Pacific High did stay off the coast for much of the end of summer and the start of fall here. But there's another story to unpack here. If you'd like to know why the monsoon didn't come on early and fast, it's because the high pressure cell is pretty far to the south here. I'm talking about South American monsoon. So the low was coming around. If that high pressure cell moved north, it would turn in like this, and we would have been talking about very, very early and abundant rains for Brazil. Our La Niña, yeah, it's there, and I think it's going to try to reach peak intensity quick. And this is a part of the Indian Ocean circulation, which has made the Indian Ocean dipole so negative right now. All of that is what's being stitched together to write the script for fall, getting into winter, but I think the big thing we saw out of this is when the system finally broke this down and the Pacific Jet sent enough momentum to get a low pressure system to first of all sneak through, leave a lingering front, let a Texas low come through, we finally brought in some rain to some extremely dry areas in the Mid-South and Midwest over toward the eastern Great Lakes. Now, this moisture is trying to make its way farther to the east early this morning, but I want to point out a couple of things. We've not yet seen the moisture get into this area, and we're going to talk about that area going forward. We know that it got cool, very windy and dry. In fact, there's really strong winds expected to come into the plains today and tomorrow, really today, behind this system as well. We know that the west is stacked up against several low-pressure systems coming across the Pacific, largely thanks to that jet extension. But I want to point out, this was some of the first rainfall in some of these areas in a very, very long time. Like some places had only measured just minuscule, nothing for a while, and now they picked up 1 to 4 inches of rain out of this past system. Take note of this. Okay? Leapfrogged, completely missed. And I want to show you that because if you come back to the statistics, that area, when compared to the historical averages, is the driest. It's at 133, that darkest shade. Okay? And this past weekend storm system, if you kind of zoom in there and have a look, did not fill that in. 4/10 of an inch. Now, I'm sure people in here were happy to just get something, but this was maybe enough to settle a little bit of the dust. Also, because a lot of this fell on the Missouri, the Mississippi, and Ohio basins and these nearby tributaries, I went to check the Mississippi this morning, and as of October 20th, it was nearly 9 feet below low stage, which means the ground was the first to kind of take in this moisture, because if I take you back to just the 17th and then show you the 20th, take note that while we did see improvements in the soil moisture in these areas, watch it again, it's still quite lacking, which means the soil took this first before it's ever going to percolate into the river system. Note how wet we are seeing the soils in the west. I mean, this is what we've had. Remember, we were just coming off of significant flooding events in parts of Arizona. The cutoff low a week ago, we just watched kind of run right down the coast of California, delivering all that rain to central California. I'm actually heading out to California this week, also to Salt Lake City for a couple of events. And I'm anxious to see what it looks like out here. And I want to fly over the mountains to see how much snow they've got packed in them. But ongoing stories for me are going to be what's left of our Midwest drought and how much longer we're going to see that. Same thing for the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, the Southeast, and then Texas. If we're going to focus on these drier areas going forward, and if there's going to be relief, I want to think about that. Because as we slide into winter, a lot of times fall's drought gets locked in place. Now, that's mainly true if you're south. I'm just going to draw a quick line of I-80. If you're north of I-80. If we keep these drier soils late, then they tend to just stay that way all the way until spring. So we're going to keep an eye on this map going forward as our attention really focuses to the systems piling into the west going out here for the next couple of weeks. So here's where we are. Notice that most of the rainfall, and there will be some mountain snow out of this, is primarily going to be confined to the Pacific Northwest. If you're looking at western moisture, we still do not have a subtropical jet. The flow is not southwest just yet. It's coming in from this direction. And that's really going to pile up quite a bit of moisture into Northern California, coastal Oregon, and Washington. We will be seeing more snow in the Rockies here, all the way down to Colorado too. But there is another wave we have to talk about the timing of that's going to be coming into Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, possibly over to the Delta here. And some of the forecasts are for more very generous rain, some of it hitting some very, very dry locations. You can see there is a system we're going to continue to monitor going over the Great Lakes into the Northeast, which are very dry. But over the next week, just take note, this will be a very sharp boundary on its western side, and we are still maintaining the drier bias into this corridor in the southeast to the mid-Atlantic with the next 7 days in the forecast here. Probability-wise, I just wanted to show you quickly, this is the chance of getting over an inch. So it seems like the intersection of Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma has the highest probability. We are looking at some enhancement from the lakes on the moisture going forward, as you can see here. This is not lake effect snow. We're not cold enough for that yet, but enhancement from the lakes through evaporative processes here. And then you also notice the driest parts of the Northeast are looking wet as well. But the West, just take a look at the system stacked up here in the North Pacific coming toward the Pacific Northwest going forward. And as you look at it, we've got 1, 2, there's a third one here, 4 is leaving, 5 is there, and 6. Like this kind of circumnavigate the planet as the jet stream has finally been invigorated. I think a lot of this began with the snows in Siberia, the mountain torque event, the movement of the jet stream, the return of it to the south which is where it's not been for weeks upon weeks. And now we're getting a bit active. And speaking of activity, this needs to be watched very carefully. That is right now called Invest 98L. And it is a tropical system we talked about last week that is expected to get into the Caribbean, which is very, very warm. The ocean temperatures in there are very warm. Now, it's been an inhospitable region for tropical development for most of this season because of high wind shear. But this system maybe stands a chance. So we need to get in there and have a good look at it. Globally, take a look at how active part of the Indian Ocean and the West Pacific are right now. There are six tropical events to keep an eye on. And at the end of this, I'm going to show you what this might be doing to, for example, India and Southeast Asia. But I want to focus right now on what's happening here. Not in the East Pacific. This next wave is expected to go almost straight to the west, but we need to keep an eye on this one. So we kind of zoom in there to the North Atlantic. This morning, 80% chance of development. It's called 98L. Let's go click on it, and I want to show you a couple of things. The ensemble forecast is quite interesting. There are a few solutions. Some of them take this system to the north soon, going over the island of Hispaniola. Some of it want to go near Cuba, the far eastern end of Cuba. And some of the solutions just have it come here towards Central America and die. We currently do not have, over the next 7 to 10 days, a lot of support that this does this. All right? And given the cadence of low-pressure systems racing across the United States, plus the displacement of the Bermuda High way over here still, there's a much higher probability that if this gets out of the Caribbean, it's going to do something like that. I think that, based on what I know today, is probably the most likely situation. So, we can look at this a lot of different ways, but let's go have a look at the super ensemble just to kind of get an idea of what all of the models from Europe and the United States and Canada are suggesting. And we're just getting out here. This is the 25th, 26th. There's pretty large spread, but what we don't see is just some decisive weather forecast model going, wow, like that. Okay, so we just need to understand that the most probable is a death in the Caribbean or a turn into this direction. Okay, so that's what we know. That's all we know right now about this particular system. It just needs to be watched very carefully. So back across the United States here this morning, we do have several areas we're keeping a close eye on the winds with. We do have some frost and freeze issues going on. You can see those colors here and here. But I want to talk about these winds coming out of the plains because there's high wind watches and warnings, red flag warnings like here in parts of Colorado that need to be watched carefully. Because already early this morning, going forward throughout the day today, this is just today, by 7 o'clock tonight, let's even go one step further. We've got a large sector of the country here that's going to be seeing 40 to 50 mile an hour gusts. I'm most concerned, like National Weather Service is coming off of Colorado. There might be a big, be interesting to see if we can get a big Chinook cloud coming off the Front Range. If you're there and you see one, take a picture and please send it to me. Eric, E-R-I-C, Snodgrass, S-N-O-D-G-R-A-S-S, at Nutrien.com. That's like nutrient without the T. I'd love it. A good Chinook wall cloud would be amazing. I've seen them, but I'd love to see another one. But just take a look at these winds coming across the country here. And if I keep playing this out, you'll just notice it stays windy. Oh, by the way, that's what the GFS does with this tropical system. Keeps it way out to the open Atlantic and doesn't bring it toward the U.S. shore. But if I just tell you over the next 2 weeks, the Central Plains here, parts of Nebraska specifically, 50, 60 mile an hour gusts. The Great Lakes are windy. The whole of the plains, as I mentioned, are. And so is the West Coast, including the interior in pockets. Now, it's where it's not windy that I'm concerned, like here, and even parts of Texas. And that's an area that we're going to have to just watch to understand if drought continues to build into those areas. So here they are. Here's the cadence of lows. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right now this morning, plus the cutoff I mentioned off the coast of California. There it is. By the time we work through the beginning of this week, there is a low that sneaks through the Great Lakes into the northeast. We'll take a look at how much precip in a second. But it's the depth of this low, which is now just a couple of days away. It's neat. We've been forecasting this for 14 days, and it's been such a consistent feature. Out ahead of that, just take note, though, there is a low coming through California that's going to get over the Four Corners states. And later this weekend, just something to keep an eye on. This is where we have a little shortwave sneaking through well ahead of the broad wave that's in the Gulf of Alaska toward the west coast. And we're going to need to look to see if this has any risk to it with respect to severe weather by the time we get late in this week. Now, as we go forward, Sunday into Monday and Tuesday, another deep low moves through here. This is the 28th, 29th, and 30th. And if that settles in to the southeast, that's really going to cool things off here right about the time we get to Halloween, especially on the backside of this as well. And playing it out, this is where we land by the time we start the new month. And I like it. I mean, there's something going on here that we just need to monitor. It's an active go of it in the pattern. All right, those winds are going to be critical to monitor. So let's go back up there to 850 millibars. That's 1 mile above our heads. And I want to just check in to see if we have any sort of potent low-level jets coming with the next low. Now, the low that's coming through the country right now, it's a bit starved for moisture. So its main precipitation is going to be around the Great Lakes, right in through here. But then what I'm keeping an eye on is a little wave that comes through California and then shows up Thursday, Friday, there it is, Friday into Saturday in the, from Texas all the way over to southern Illinois. And there's just a risk with this, if it does draw in some instability, to be severe. Now, your eye was probably just watching the Pacific Northwest. I mean, look at the deep lows that are coming into the Gulf of Alaska and into British Columbia and into the Pacific Northwest. There's going to be a lot of moisture coming through there, and they just don't quit. Here is the deep low I mentioned just ahead of Halloween, and that's what the European model is doing with this tropical system. Now, that's about as far as I'm going to trust it. Not even really trust it that far, but notice it's still not doing something like this. And as I mentioned, if you get a big front that comes through here on the leading edge of this, so that front will come out like that, this could hit and it's gone. It's just going to go off in that direction. All right, so is there any instability with the little wave coming out of California later this week and getting into the, getting into the plains? That's Thursday, Friday, yes, see? Getting into Saturday. And I think we just need to keep an eye on this region just for the potential for some stronger storms going forward. But the bigger picture, if we look at the precipitation type and intensity, there's the wave I mentioned on Tuesday going over the Great Lakes, very windy, settles into the northeast, into Ontario and Quebec. Look at that moisture. And then here we are. So did you see the cutoff low coming through California? That's Wednesday. Maybe a little snow in the Sierra, over the Rocky Mountains on Thursday, ejects into the plains. That's Friday morning. And I just think we need to watch it Saturday afternoon and evening here. Now, snow Rockies, snow Cascades, deep low coming into the Pacific Northwest. That's this weekend. And that's a snowmaker. It's just a continual push of moisture, probably going to be classified as an atmospheric river event. We'll check that out throughout the week. Man, that is just a big system this upcoming weekend. We then watch as the next low curls up on the 27th, 28th, and 29th. There it is. That's a big one that goes over the Great Lakes. And then what I'm curious about is as this moves forward, okay, on the backside where we are expecting very strong winds, are we going to be seeing cold conditions here that slide toward the east as we work our way into the holiday weekend, which would be not this weekend, but next. Let's go ahead and add up total precip, and we'll look at snow next. This is total accumulated precip from the European. So look at that. Through Wednesday, with a combination of those two lows, we're putting down 1 to 2 inches, maybe more in some areas, the driest parts of the Northeast. But that second low comes through here. It's too starved for moisture to be bringing precipitation farther to the south. That's Wednesday. The cutoff low is moving through California, through Thursday into Friday. It gets over the Great Lakes. Into Friday, Saturday, it moves into, this section of the plains and Mid-South. And that, again, that's the time frame we're going to look at. Meanwhile, in the Northwest, coastal rainfall could be huge in California and Oregon and Washington. And just playing this forward, now we can see that system on the 28th and 29th going across the Great Lakes. Snowfall real quick. There we go, playing it out through this weekend. And with the next few waves coming through, we're going to add more to the Rockies and Cascades. By the way, real quick, something to think about here. Let's open up a new tab. If you go to Ag Weather and you go to Historical Weather, I do have the up and running maps for this year on snowfall. So you can kind of see your season departure from normal, your season to date percent of normal, and then your total snow for the season so far. Okay, so just a couple of things to take a look at there. All right, where were we? Here. By the time we get into week 2, with the cadence of lows that continue to move through the country like this, all right? See it in all 4 models. I'm concerned about how dry we do end up leaving the southern plains, which means the moisture coming through this weekend that could get into this area is critical, just knowing that that seems to be a vulnerable spot for going drier. What was interesting was on Friday, the Climate Prediction Center released their new week 3, week 4 outlook for the first 2 weeks of November. And they went back over drier around Illinois and Indiana, and then stretching north and south around that, but didn't maintain the drier risks down into Texas. Now, thinking about it, I imagine they would adjust their forecast now. And my reasoning for that is we've just got a little bit more evidence on some things getting dislodged in the pattern, which I'm going to show you in just a second here. But I wanted you to notice that the new November forecast from the European model, about the only area of concern that I'm thinking about is why we continue to see the southeast showing up on the drier side of average. Same thing for southern Texas. But there seems to be a wedge in here in the month of November that stays wetter, includes the Great Lakes and Northeast. And when you look out at the west, these systems have to enter somewhere. So while I don't expect a fully developed subtropical jet, I think that the west is going to continue to see, repeated active time periods going forward into this month. All right, temperatures. Behind the front that just snuck through, it's quite cooler than it was yesterday, 20, some places 30 degrees cooler than yesterday, but there's already the warm-up with the downslope wind event coming off the mountains, and out ahead of it there's some southerly winds, so we're still seeing some warm conditions on the backside. Even with the cool down that came through this weekend, this is how the temperatures stack up against normal from the beginning of November. So very mild from New Mexico and Texas all the way through the Great Lakes, and very cold out west. It's been a very cold October so far, and I'm not expecting this to change too much. If you look at the frost threat over the next 7 days, finally, it looks as though we're going to get a frost through much of Iowa, northern Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, even into West Virginia. This would be, for several locations here, the first frost of the year coming through. But this is actually a week later than average for a lot of these folks, so it's not necessarily a major climatological concern. But the temperatures are going to do something like this, high temperatures. This is Monday's highs. Getting into Tuesday, so that low goes through the Great Lakes. See all the cold air behind it here. Still very hot in southern Texas. It stays that way through Wednesday and Thursday down here. But much cooler air moving across the Great Lakes into the northeast. We then see in the west, as this upcoming weekend is going to be very active. Take a look at how cold it gets in the west as that takes shape here. About the only thing that stays hot, the only place that stays hot is going to be Texas throughout this entire week. Bigger picture, go to the matrix view. So there it is. You can see how hot Texas is for the next 5 days. But I want to take note, we know there's this system like the 28th, 29th. And as it comes through, after it comes through, several of the models are going more aggressive after a cold finished October and start to November. Okay? So we just need to keep an eye on that transition out there, day 10 through 15 in the forecast. All right, with all that being said, I want to talk about something that I'm just unable to pin this down. We are, for the first time, going to bring back up the MJO because starting now and going through the 3rd and 4th of November, the MJO seems to kind of have a coherent bit of movement to it, coming out of the Indian Ocean and maybe sliding into phase 4, 5, 6, with also an extension of some rising motion here as well. Now, when I think this through, this is what typically happens if you go, through and toward phase 4, 5, and 6 by the time you start November. Phase 4 tends to give us this look with deep troughs here and ridges there. And I don't know why we would look at this historical correlation and say that this year is going to look like that. I think other things are dominating this pattern, and we're not getting a true MJO dominant signal. So I'm not going to spend time on it because I don't buy it yet. Maybe Matt will have a different opinion tomorrow, and we'll kind of work on this. But what I think is the most important feature is here. Now, I don't often show you this one, but this is Earth relative atmospheric angular momentum, and it's coming from Victor Cassini's website up at Northern Illinois University. This is the jet extension. Okay, so if you look at it, that is average, that dashed line, and this is the extra pump of momentum that has shown up around 40 to 50 degrees north latitude. Okay, so that's what we've been talking about. That's what's brought global momentum in the forecast out of its basement. But there's more to this that I want you to see in a few seconds. If you notice, see the average line, the dashed one? All of this is below normal momentum. All of this is below normal momentum. And sometimes these graphics make that look unimportant, but it's the total area that you have to pay attention to, okay? And so we have to take the integral of this to see what's going on. And the reason I bring that up is because global momentum is in the basement across the entire planet. But it's not here. And that is where the Pacific jet and the Atlantic jet, the jet that runs across the northern hemisphere in the mid-latitudes, lives. All the momentum, the westward momentum, is lost in the tropics right here and here. And you're going, well, what is that? That's La Niña. That is the trade winds going against, they're going to the west from the east. And that's why we think that this La Niña is probably going to peak early. It's really pushing hard for an early peak. Now, what do we do with that? What does that even mean? Well, as we've watched it build up, we noticed that the last 45 days has given us this global precipitation pattern. We've noted that parts of the interiors of large continents, like here, coming out of Ukraine into Russia, have been very dry. You've probably heard some of the winter wheat issues going on here. We've seen India, who's had flow doing something like this for so long, very wet. Plus, there's been activity all around it. Southeast Asia has been wet. North of the Yangtze River, nudging toward the North China Plain, has been wetter. We've been drier along the coasts of Australia here, and the south coast, and also the east coast from New South Wales through Victoria and also Queensland here. And we've known that the monsoon is not, it's come on fits and starts, right? It's not been just full-blown La Niña. And we've been discussing at length where it's been wet up the plains in the west, but not in the Midwest, south or southeast or northeast. Okay, well, where are we? Is this all MJO driven? No, it's not. What I continue to see is all that tropical activity over here in the Indian Ocean and Pacific. We take note of the drier into the interior over the next 2 weeks. That's what this is for China. There seems to be better rain coming out of Ukraine into Russia, which if they're trying to plant winter wheat, maybe that's a major benefit. We're still dry in Queensland, New South Wales, but there's better rain coming towards South Australia near Adelaide and down toward Victoria here. Over the next 2 weeks, though, in the United States, there it is. There's our full-on jet extension coming into the west. Systems coming through like this. So you can see where we are wetter versus drier. And that is the tropical system we're monitoring right now, 98L. But down into South America, we're going back over to a drier time period. Now, understand, I said drier, not dry. If they're off, if we just kind of match this up, 50 millimeters of rain, well, if over a 2-week time period, 80 to 100 millimeters of rain is normal, they're going to be getting some moisture into this area. I'm not sure if you saw this, but I'll bring it up real quick. IMEA, there we go. This is the page I use to monitor planting progress in Mato Grosso, one of their biggest producing states. And if we come down here and have a look at the newest data, there we go. Instead of falling off, they went back to a normal progression. The slope of that line matches the 5-year average, and they're now up to 43% planted in that region. So big question will be, is this drier forecast for the next 2 weeks going to be a hindrance, for this area? And again, the European fell better in line with the GFS on that. But back to the story, is La Niña still our most dominant and key feature going forward? Well, every model is suggesting it is out there in the longer range. And that's why when you look at the newest data, which came out from this is from Columbia University, the IRI multi-model probability forecast, you see that November through January, it's drier from pockets of the Sun Belt through the Cotton Belt. It's drier in Argentina, really along the Paraná River Basin, so southern Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina. It has a lot of the interior of China very dry, but it has better rains coming out of parts of Eastern Europe, getting through Ukraine, and then into parts of Russia. It has Indonesia and the island archipelago down here very wet. Same thing for a lot of Australia. But if we if we push this forward, this is what December, January, February looks like. Again, the model's still keeping that southeastern drought issue a risk, while could be much more active northwest through the interior of the United States. The heart of summer in the southern hemisphere, drier into Argentina, southern Brazil, although the signal's not strong. January, February, March, this is where we land. And it's just to point out here what the precipitation pattern is doing as the models respond to the most dominant signal, which is La Niña. Temperature-wise, this is what the model's predicting for the heart of winter. I think what we need to monitor here is just how often do we build up a reservoir of really cold air here that can get let out across the country. That's very typical of La Niña winters, and by the way, it happened last year. So I'm going to stop there. You have the setup for this week, what we're going to be thinking about and talking about. I'll be interested to hear what Matt's going to dig into tomorrow, and I'm going to be talking a lot with Andrew about the severe weather threat we might see as we progress through this active pattern. So we'll report back to you. You all take care, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.